Sounded pretty good, right? So today we're looking at my 2015 Yamaha Bolt. So I've owned my bike for about 5,000 miles, and I think it's given me a pretty fair synopsis on the pros and cons, the things that I really like, and some of the drawbacks that you're going to run into if you want to purchase one of these. Now, before I go into the full review, I do want to give an overview of what the Yamaha Bolt is and where it sits in the bike marketplace. Yamaha first released the Bolt back in 2013, and it was labeled under their Sport Heritage lineup. So this V-twin classic bobber style design was really in the market for taking out one competitor, which was the Harley Sportster, the Iron 8083 and the Iron 1200, or the Harley 48, whichever iteration you want to call it. This was the direct competitor from Yamaha that was trying to take market share in that space. To cover the Bolt specs really quickly, the bike weighs about 540 pounds. It comes with a single overhead cam V-twin engine that puts out a pretty adequate 54 horsepower at 5,500 RPMs and just shy of 60 foot-pounds of torque at 3,000 RPMs. It's a fuel-injected bike. It comes with a 5-speed transmission. I honestly have no clue why they wouldn't add a 6-gear to this, but final drive comes through a belt and not a chain. Alright, so now let's get to the good part where I get to yap about the things I really like about this bike, and then I will follow up with some of the drawbacks and things that I don't really like about it. I think the most logical thing to start with is the aesthetic of this bike. I would say on a more objective scale, this is going to be one of the main drivers as to why people really do like the Yamaha Bolt. Now, before I talk about the aesthetic, let's rewind back to what 2013 was. So in the early 2010s, we actually saw Harley, the leader in the cruiser marketplace, actually peaking in revenue, but there was this inflection point of hitting peak revenues with the Gen X and baby boomer generation to where they needed to pivot and look at different options tailored towards people like in my generation, people of millennial/Gen Z generations for the future. And going back to the aesthetic, I think Yamaha was ahead of the curve in terms of getting the classic bobber style that was tailored towards a younger generation. I mean, just look at the PR video that they initially came out with. I actually remember the first time that I saw a Yamaha Bolt when I was at one of the dealerships out in Fullerton, California, and it blew me away because I was looking at a Honda Shadow at the time, which is relatively in the same class, and they came out with the Shadow Phantom, which is a more aggressive black is the new chrome type of styling that Honda had on their cruiser. But the Bolt, it just had this really cool retro bobber style to it that I really enjoyed, and I literally do remember the first time that I saw this bike in 2013, 2014, and it really stuck with me ever since I wanted to look at a bike in the cruiser class. But my point is, unless you hate cruisers, you probably do like or appreciate some features that this bike has. Now, the next thing I want to move on to is the overall handling and feel of the bike while I'm riding. Now, this bike is very welcoming. It has a 27-inch seat height, so for shorter people 5'9" and below, it's going to be very welcoming for you to have a mid-control cruiser that has a low seat height and you're able to flat-foot it and not feel unsteady with the 540 pounds that it is. The lean angle on this bike varies from 33 to 37 degrees depending on what trim level that you have, and all that to really just say that this bike is comfortable, easy to ride, pretty beginner friendly. But I would say that if you were gonna get this bike or cruiser, any cruiser really in this class, you're not going up to GMR and taking some hardcore twisty roads. I mean, I guess you can, but at the end of the day, most people are getting a cruiser because they want to go on longer rides, be more comfortable, take advantage of the seating position, the comfortability of a cruiser in general, and that's what this bike definitely provides. So the bike looks good, the bike handles pretty good. I want to move on to the last point of my argument for the pros of this bike, which is going to be the value and reliability that you get in this really cost-effective package. Now hear me out. So we got to remember what this bike is actually competing with. The Harley Davidson in this class, let's just say that you're looking at an Iron 1200, which is a bigger motor, it's a faster bike, it puts down more horsepower, and it's an amazing bike. My brother has one, I've been able to ride it quite a bit, so I definitely have a good understanding of the strengths of that bike over this one. When I found my 2015 R-Spec Yamaha Bolt back in 2018, so the bike was 3 years old, had 3,400 miles on it. I bought it for $5,000 flat, and it already had a stage 1 kit, it already had the Vance & Hines pipes, a lot of good performance mods that were entry level, along with a few cosmetic things that were a good few $100s. Now, if you were to source the same Iron 1200 with the same exact performance mods that I've done, some of the cosmetic mods, on a private party scale, you're probably looking at a very safe $9,000 to $11,000 for it being only a few years old. We're talking in the ballpark of almost double the price, depending on a few factors. In my honest opinion, probably 10 to 15% more of the experience in terms of the power, the personality that everyone talks about with Harleys. I think it is there. And if you had a bag of money and you hit the lottery, yeah, I think if you want to get a cruiser and you want to have the full raw experience of having that, go buy the Iron 1200 for all the rich people out there watching this video. But for the people who live in reality, I think that the Yamaha Bolt is a great compromise of getting a reliable JDM bike that feels really refined on the road, that is gonna get you from point A to point B in a very comfortable fashion, and you're not gonna have to worry about the reliability or being stranded, which is something that people like myself really do value. One last item that I do want to touch on is going to be the ability to modify this bike. Now, this is kind of a neutral standpoint. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a huge pro. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a large con. And the reason being is that this bike is meant to be modified. But the problem is that you don't have the same vast aftermarket catalog that you get on the scale that you would a Harley Davidson. So I'll caveat this in the neutral standpoint of this is a bike where it really is like a DRZ 400 or a bike where you start with a clean slate and kind of make it your own, hence why mine has more of a club style to it. But the caveat being that the aftermarket's not going to be as vast as the Harley counterparts. So I'll let you think what you will of that. That's just my take on it. With all those good things that I really like about this bike, there are definitely some drawbacks that I want to point out specifically in this video. So after 5,000 miles of riding this, the first thing that I got to address here is the death wobble. For those that are living with their head in the sand and haven't heard of a Yamaha Bolt, this thing is notorious for having a really bad death wobble. When you're roughly going 40 to 50 miles per hour, that's when I experience it the most. There are pages and pages on forums of potential quote unquote solutions to this issue. I have done the head steering bearings, I have done new tires, I have done the hard mount handlebar conversion, and I can't fully say that it's been totally mitigated from my bike. It's gotten a lot better, which is great, but I don't know what about the geometry needs to be changed with the Yamaha Bolt, but it drives me insane when I even feel the slightest bit of twitchiness when I'm in that 40 to 50 mile per hour range. And that is something to definitely take into consideration here. You can mitigate it quite a bit, but I personally don't see it ever fully going away, especially as you have tire wear, tire pressure, and other factors at hand that can initiate the death wobble that everyone refers to. The next thing that I want to talk about is going to be centered around the top end range of this bike. Now, before you think that I'm going down this rabbit hole of saying that 54 horsepower is not enough, you're buying a cruiser. These are always going to be power to weight ratio nightmares, but you have to keep in mind that this is a reliable Yamaha engine that is not going to be too stressed out, that's going to go tens of thousands, if not 100,000 miles plus. But what I'm really complaining about here is the fact that Yamaha did not think to put a 6-speed transmission in this, and this is how it's been for the past 10 years of manufacturing this bike. I don't know why for a cruiser class bike they wouldn't put a 6-gear where you can cruise at 80 and not have your bike feel like it's stressed out at all. Now, that being said, I think people blow out of proportion how potentially stressed out this engine actually is at those types of speeds. But going back to my point, if you had a 6-gear to just easily put it in the lower or more middle RPM range instead of what feels like about 60 to 65%, I think the bike would be a little bit happier and longer cruises could be a lot more comfortable with this bike specifically. But I will say, the transmission feels amazing, by the way, if you ever ride one. It is one of the notchiest but smooth feeling transmissions I have ever ridden in a street bike, and I absolutely do love that. With that, that's going to be the end of this video, guys. Thank you so much if you made it this far in. I really appreciate you watching this 5,000 mile review of my 2015 Yamaha Bolt. This is my primary bike, so I would love to hear any feedback on what videos you guys would like to see specific to this bike. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to share them in the comment section below, and consider subscribing for any future videos that I start to crank out. Thank you guys again for watching this video, and I will catch you on the next one.